It was a Sunday afternoon with the smell of fresh bread in the air and my grandchildren's drawings still taped to the refrigerator when my daughter-in-law walked into my kitchen, picked up my house keys from the counter, and dropped them into her pocket like they already belonged to her. She looked right at me when she did it. Teddy. Like she was waiting to see if I would dare say a word. My son was standing by the back door pretending to check his phone. Nobody spoke. The bread kept baking. And I just wiped my hands on my apron slowly and smiled the way a woman smiles when she already knows the ending of a story nobody else has finished reading yet. I said nothing. But something in me clicked into place like a key turning in a very old lock. Before I tell you the rest, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city and your country down in the comments because these stories carry more weight when we know we are not the only ones who have lived them. My name is Gloria, and I am sitting here in Georgia with a cup of tea going cold beside me because some nights the remembering takes longer than you plan for. I have been turning that Sunday over in my mind for months now. Not because it broke me, but because it was the moment I finally understood that patience without a plan is just waiting to be hurt. And I had been patient for a very long time. She had moved into our lives the way certain plants move into a garden. Quietly at first. Pretty even. The kind of thing you smile at before you realize it is pulling everything toward itself and leaving the other roots with nothing. My son loved her. That part one never doubted. But love has a way of making people hand over things they should be holding more carefully. And she had a talent, a real gift, for making a person feel like giving her control was the same thing as giving her love. I watched it happen slowly. First it was small things. What he wore to family dinners. Then it was bigger things. Which relatives got invited and which ones got quietly left off the list. And then it became my things. My kitchen. My schedule. My role in my own family. I remember the first time she rearranged my living room without asking. She said she thought it would feel more open. More modern. And she smiled so warmly when she said it that I almost thanked her. Almost. But I stood there looking at the chair my late husband used to read in, pushed now into a corner like an afterthought, and I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger exactly. More like a quiet warning bell ringing somewhere deep in a place I had learned not to ignore. I moved the chair back that evening. She never mentioned it. But the way she looked at it the next time she visited told me everything. I had spent my whole life building something real. Not flashy. Not the kind of thing people write about or photograph for magazines. But solid. The kind of solid that holds through storms and disappointments and years that test everything you thought you knew about yourself. I raised my son alone for a long stretch of time when things fell apart in ways I never saw coming. There was no safety net waiting for us. No family money to dip into when the car broke down or the heating gave out in January. There was just me and a set of choices I made every single day before anyone else in the house woke up. I learned to be smart not because someone taught me but because being careless had consequences I could not afford. I saved when saving felt impossible. I put things in order when the world felt like it was tilting sideways. And I made decisions quietly and carefully because I understood that the people who survive hard seasons are rarely the loudest ones in the room. They are the ones who prepared when nobody was watching. I did not talk about money at the dinner table. I did not wave my plans in front of people like a flag. I simply kept building, kept protecting, kept making sure that whatever came next could not catch me with nothing in my hands. My son grew up watching me do all of that. He saw the discipline. He saw the early mornings and the careful choices and the way I never panicked even when I had every reason to. And for a while I thought it had settled into him the way good things settle into a child when you model them long enough. But children grow up and fall in love, and sometimes the person they love has a very different idea of how the world works. And sometimes that idea sounds so confident, so certain, so modern that a young man forgets what he learned at his mother's kitchen table. Not out of cruelty. Out of distraction. Out of wanting to keep the peace at home. I understood that. I even forgave it before he ever asked me to. But forgiving something does not mean pretending it is not happening. And what was happening in my family had moved far past a few rearranged chairs and uninvited opinions. It had moved into territory that I could not ignore without losing something I had spent a lifetime building. The month before that Sunday I had noticed things. Statements I had not reviewed. A letter from a financial institution addressed to my home but opened before it reached me. A conversation my son and I were supposed to have about a property decision that somehow never happened, even though I had brought it up twice. Each thing on its own looks small, easy to explain away, easy to file under miscommunication or just life being busy. But I have lived long enough to know that small things moving in the same direction are never really small. They are a pattern. And patterns do not lie even when the people creating them are very good at smiling. So by the time that Sunday afternoon came around, I was not surprised when she reached for my keys. I was ready. I had been ready for weeks. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that while she was busy making moves, I had already made mine. The house she thought she was gaining access to was not the house that held what mattered most. The keys she dropped into her pocket opened a door, yes. But they did not open the right doors. And the accounts she assumed were under her influence because my son had mentioned them once in passing were not the accounts she thought they were. I had restructured things quietly and carefully with the help of someone I trusted long before her confidence had grown into this kind of boldness. I was not playing defense. I was simply standing in a position she had not bothered to scout because she never imagined I would think that far ahead. That is the thing about underestimating an older woman. You assume that age has made her slower, less sharp, more willing to accept whatever is handed to her because she is tired or grateful or simply too polite to push back. But what age actually does, if you have lived it with any kind of intention, is teach you exactly which battles matter and exactly how to win them without raising your voice. I was not tired. I was not grateful for crumbs. And I was not too polite. I was simply waiting for the right moment in the right room with the right people present so that the truth would land somewhere it could not be argued away. That moment came 3 Sundays after the key incident. She had organized what she called a family meeting at my son's house. She sent out messages to relatives. She prepared an agenda. She even printed papers, which I thought was a very bold choice for someone who had not yet learned that paper cuts both ways. I drove over that morning knowing what was coming. Not every detail, but the shape of it. The feeling of a room being arranged against you is something you recognize when you have felt it before. And I had felt it before in harder rooms than a Sunday living room with store-bought coffee and folding chairs. When I arrived, several relatives were already there. Some of them looked at me with that particular expression people wear when they have been told a story about you and they are waiting to see if you will confirm it. Cousin I had not seen in 2 years. My son's uncle on his father's side. A neighbor she had befriended recently and clearly decided to include for reasons I could guess easily enough. My son was standing near the window with his arms crossed the way he stands when he is uncomfortable but has decided to stay quiet about it. He hugged me, quickly, carefully, like a man balancing something fragile. She greeted me at the door with a smile that was 1 degree warmer than it needed to be. The kind of smile that has already decided how the conversation will go and is simply being polite about the part before it gets there. She offered me coffee. I accepted it because I was not there to be rude. I was there to listen and to let the room reveal itself the way rooms always do when someone has planned something they believe is airtight. I sat in the chair closest to the window, not the one she pointed me toward. That seemed to bother her slightly, though she hid it quickly. Small things matter when you are paying attention. The meeting started with pleasantries. Someone talked about the weather. Someone else mentioned a birthday coming up. And then she set her papers on the coffee table and folded her hands on top of them like a woman who had practiced this moment more than once. She talked about family unity, about shared responsibility, about how sometimes the people we love need guidance even when they believe they do not. Every sentence was wrapped in warmth. Every point was framed as care. But underneath the warmth was a structure, plan. And that plan had my name at the center of it in a way that was not flattering. She suggested that given my age and what she called the complexity of my current arrangements, it would make sense for a trusted family member, herself, to take a more active role in overseeing certain decisions. She used words like support and protection and making sure everything is handled properly going forward. And I watched the relatives nodding along, some of them slowly, some of them with real concern on their faces because they were hearing this for the first time and they had been given no version of events except hers. I kept my hands in my lap. Kept my face calm. I let her finish completely. Because the most important thing I have learned in all my years is that you do not stop someone in the middle of showing you who they are. You let them finish. You let the room hear all of it. And then you speak. When she was done, there was a pause. The kind that waits for agreement, or at least for quiet acceptance. My son cleared his throat. The cousin shifted in his seat. And she looked at me with that expression again. Steady. Certain. Waiting for me to nod along or ask a gentle question or maybe look a little confused and grateful for the concern. I did none of those things. I reached into my bag. And hurried. The way you reach for something you have known was there the whole time. And I pulled out a folder. Not thick. Not dramatic. Just a plain folder the color of a manila envelope with a small label on the tab that I did not need to show anyone. I set it on my knee and I looked at her and I said her name clearly so that every person in that room heard me begin. I told her I appreciated the care she was describing. I said it like I meant it because I do believe that some small part of her had convinced itself this was genuine. Then I opened the folder. I told the room that 3 weeks ago I had met with my attorney. Not because I was afraid or confused or in need of management, but because I had seen this conversation coming the way you see weather coming when you have lived in a place long enough to read the sky. I told them that every account, every property arrangement, every financial structure with my name on it had been reviewed, updated, and reorganized in ways that reflected my own clear and current wishes. Documented, witnessed, filed. There was no ambiguity. There was no opening. There was no version of oversight that could reach what she thought she was reaching for. The nodding stopped. The cousin leaned forward. My son turned from the window and looked at the folder the way people look at something that changes the shape of a room. She did not move for a moment. Then she tried to smile again, but it came out smaller this time. She said something about how that was not what she meant. About how she was simply trying to help. About how I had misunderstood the whole thing. I let her speak. And then I said very gently that I had not misunderstood anything. That a woman who built what I built from nothing does not misunderstand a document being slid toward her at a family meeting. The room went quiet in that deep way that rooms go quiet when something true has been said out loud and there is no comfortable response to it. My son walked away from the window. He sat down on the arm of the chair beside me, not in a chair of his own. Just on the arm, close to me, like someone who has just remembered where he belongs. And when he spoke, his voice was careful and low. He asked her directly what exactly she had submitted or started or contacted on my behalf. And the way he asked it told me he had already started putting things together in his head that he had been avoiding for months. She tried to redirect. She talked about intentions. She talked about how stressful it all was and how she had only ever wanted the family to be stable and looked after. But he did not let it redirect. He stayed on the question. Gently but firmly, in the way people are firm when they have finally decided that the kindest thing they can do is stop pretending. The cousin excused himself to get more coffee. The neighbor looked at her phone. The uncle stood up and stretched and said he needed some air. And it was just us. The three of us. And the folder on my knee. And the truth that had already filled the room. She looked at me then with something different in her face. Not the measuring look from before. Not the warm performance look. Something more stripped down. Almost young. Like someone who had rehearsed a play and the other actors had stopped following the script, and she no longer knew which direction to walk in. I did not feel triumph looking at her. I want to say that clearly because triumph would have been cheap and small, and I had not come that far to be cheap and small. What I felt was something closer to sorrow. The kind of sorrow that comes from watching someone choose the hardest way when an easier, kinder way was always right there available. I told her that I did not raise my son to live in a house where his mother was something to be managed. I told her that the love I had for my son and for those grandchildren was not a resource to be tapped or a situation to be controlled. It was real and it was permanent, and it did not come with a condition that required me to make myself smaller so she could feel larger. I kept my voice even. Kept my words clean. Because the people in that room did not need a scene. They needed the truth spoken in a way that would still be standing the next morning and the morning after that. She started to cry. I had wondered if that would come. The tears of someone who has run out of other tools. I handed her a tissue from my bag because that is what you do. You do not become cruel simply because someone treated you carelessly. She said she was sorry. She said she had been scared. She said she did not mean it the way it looked. And I listened to all of it without interrupting because those words deserved a witness even if they came late. But I also did not rush to reassure her that everything was fine because everything was not fine yet, and pretending otherwise would have helped no one. My son sat beside me through all of it, not speaking much, but present in a way he had not been present in a long time. And at one point he reached over and put his hand over mine on the armrest. That gesture, that one quiet gesture, said more than anything that had been spoken out loud in that room all morning. Said I see you. It said I am sorry for the season of silence. It said I remember who you are and I remember what you gave up so I could be standing here at all. I did not cry. Not because I was not moved, but because I had already done that part in private where it belonged. The relatives drifted back in ones and twos. The energy in the room had changed so completely that even the ones who had only heard her version could feel it. Conversations restarted but softer. Someone offered to help clear the coffee cups. The neighbor said her goodbyes quietly and left without the energy she had arrived with. And the cousin found a reason to speak to me directly for the first time in years and asked genuinely how I had been doing. Not the polite asking. The real kind. The kind that means I was not expecting to see you clearly today, but here we both are. Before I left, I asked to speak to my son alone for a few minutes. We stepped into the back hallway and stood near the old coat hooks that still had a tiny jacket of his from years ago hanging on the lowest one. I never asked her to take it down. Some things you leave where they are because they remind you of the parts that mattered. He looked tired. Hollowed out the way people look after they have been holding a shape that did not fit them for too long. I told him I was not angry with him. That is the thing people always expect. The anger. But anger burns through and leaves nothing useful behind. What I felt was more important than anger. It was clarity. And I wanted him to have some of it too. I told him that I had protected what I built not to hold it over his head but to make sure it would still be there when he needed it. That real love does not come with a lever. It does not get held above someone to make them obedient. Simply stays steady, available, without conditions attached to behavior. I told him I wanted him to be happy, genuinely happy, not managed, not performing, not afraid of stepping too close to his own mother at a Christmas table. He cried then, quietly, standing in that hallway with a small jacket on the hook behind him, and I let him because some things need to come out before the healing can start, and rushing a person through their grief is just another kind of impatience. I put my hand on his shoulder and I kept it there until the quiet returned. And then I said what I needed to say. I told him that the door was always open. That nothing between us was broken beyond repair. That families bend in hard winds and sometimes they bend very far, but bending is not the same as breaking. And I believed in him even when he had forgotten to believe in himself. When I walked back out into the main room, she was standing near the kitchen doorway with her arms wrapped around herself. Not dramatically, just quietly, like someone who had set down a heavy thing and was not yet sure what to do with her empty hands. I looked at her. She looked at me. And I said something I had not planned to say, but that felt true in the way that unplanned things sometimes are more true than rehearsed ones. I told her that the family she married into was not a prize to be won or a territory to be claimed. It was a living thing, built from love and sacrifice and years of hard, quiet work. And if she wanted to be part of it, really part of it, not in charge of it but part of it, then there was still room for that. There had always been room for that. But it required something she had not yet tried. It required her to stop seeing every person around her as either a tool or a threat and start seeing them as people who were also just trying to find their way. She did not answer me right away. She just nodded, small and honest, without the performance behind it. And that nod meant more to me than any of the words she had spoken all morning because it came from somewhere underneath the strategy and the planning and the careful smiling. Picked up my bag. I said goodbye to the grandchildren who had been kept upstairs through all of it. Bless them. I kissed their heads and I promised them banana bread the following Saturday because children need to know that love shows up in ordinary ways and keeps its promises. The oldest one hugged my legs and did not let go for a long moment, and I let that hug be what it was. Complete. Uncomplicated. The purest thing in the whole day. When I finally stepped outside, the air was cool and carrying the smell of someone's fireplace nearby. I stood on the front step for just a moment and breathed. Not dramatically. Just breathing the way you breathe when something heavy has shifted off your shoulders and you want to feel the difference before you start moving again. I had not come to that meeting to destroy anything. I want to be clear about that because sometimes when a woman stands her ground firmly, people assume she came to fight. But I came to tell the truth. I came to protect what was mine, not because it was mine, but because what was mine had been built for all of them too. The house, the stability, the quiet foundation under everything was never just for me. It was for my son, for his children, for the life I hoped they would all grow into together. I drove home slowly, not because I was sad, but because I wanted the day to settle in me at a pace that let me hold on to the parts worth keeping. The cousin's real question. My son's hand over mine. The small honest nod. Those were the pieces I wanted to carry forward. The other parts, the planned speeches, the staged concern, the watching eyes waiting for me to lose my footing, those I let the road take with every mile I put behind me, because some things are only useful as lessons, and once you have learned the lesson, the weight of it stops belonging to you. The weeks that followed were different. Not perfect. Real life is never the kind of different that looks like a finished story with clean edges. But different in the ways that matter. My son called more. Not long calls always. Sometimes just 5 minutes. Checking in. Asking about my week. Telling me something funny one of the grandkids said. Those 5-minute calls were worth more to me than 100 grand gestures, because they said I am choosing to stay connected, and I am doing it on a regular Tuesday, not just when something needs to be repaired. She came to see me about 2 weeks after the meeting. Alone. Without my son. She stood at my front door with a container of cookies she had made. Not store-bought, actually made. With her own hands, which I noticed and which mattered. I let her in. Made tea. We sat at my kitchen table where I have had more honest conversations than I can count, and we talked. Not easily at first. Slowly, the way two people talk when there is real distance between them and they are both deciding whether to cross it. She told me things I had not known. About her own family. Her own fears. The things that had shaped her before she ever walked into mine. I did not interrupt, and I did not rush to fix anything, because fixing is not the same as hearing, and she needed to be heard first. When she was done, I told her about myself. Not everything, but enough. The years of stretching and planning and holding things together quietly, and the particular loneliness of being a woman who keeps building even when nobody around her notices the building. I told her what I hoped for. Not what I demanded. What I hoped for. And I think that distinction landed somewhere in her, because her eyes changed in the middle of it. Often. Like someone recognizing a landscape they had only seen from a distance before. We did not solve everything that afternoon. Relationships like ours do not get solved in an afternoon over tea and cookies, no matter how good the cookies are. But something started. Some small tender beginning of a thing that had been missing, and I chose to treat it carefully, the way you treat any new beginning. With patience. With consistency. With a willingness to show up again even when it is inconvenient. 'Cause that is what I have always known. The most important things are built slowly and quietly, and they require you to keep choosing them even on the days when you do not feel like it. I think about the woman I was when I started this journey. Young and working and raising a child, and telling myself every day that it would be worth it. That the quiet mornings and the careful choices and the years of building something solid would matter someday, even if they never got celebrated or even fully seen. And I want to tell that younger version of myself that yes. It was worth it. Every single bit of it. Because what you build with intention and love does not disappear just because someone tries to reach for it carelessly. Holds. Says. And in the end, it speaks for itself more clearly than any argument ever could.